about annual campaigns. We chose this topic because it was the one that was most requested from our recent survey. Hopefully, y'all were able to observe the webinar last week where we reviewed the results of that survey. If not, let me just recap it for you. We decided to send the survey out in late June due to the fact that most of the anecdotal evidence we would hear about, certainly the news reports, tended to be pretty negative. And we weren't sure we were really getting a clear picture of what our churches were experiencing. So we sent out the survey, got a good response. And what we found was things were a whole lot better than you'd be led to believe at 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night watching TV. Obviously, the most dramatic change was the way in which we worship. And everybody's learning how to worship online. Various methods, but all seemingly successful. Churches are reporting having twice as many attendees or participants or 4 times as many. One church in particular talked about reaching 10 times as many people as they used to. Of course, we always are interested in the money side of the church, and so we ask questions there. How are they doing thus far throughout the year? 47% of the churches said, you know, we're meeting our budget or we're really ahead of our budget. About 10% said we're pretty significantly behind enough to be concerned, and the balance, of course, was somewhere in between. We also asked the questions, how do you think the rest of the year will go? The numbers got better. 55% of the churches said they expected to meet or beat their budget projections, and that worry group shrunk down to 8%. Now, frankly, I'm not sure that's any different than any June in any previous year. I would assume there would have always been some churches, of some small number, that were concerned about their finances, certainly in the beginning or middle of summertime. So those results were not all that surprising. We also asked, how can we help your church? What type of information might you need? And the number one request we received was about annual campaigns. So with that in mind, we decided to have this webinar today, and we asked Karl Mattison to help us. You know, in the Methodist system, we have about 50 foundations in existence, and they're somewhat similar one way or the other. The Presbyterians do it differently. They have one foundation. Karl is the director of giving resources for that foundation. He's been doing this a long time, and as his title might indicate, it's the money side of faith that he deals with most often. He tells me that this annual campaign question is something that's come up with him. Our survey reflected that all of our churches intend to have an annual campaign. Most of them said it was going to be different, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it was different. But to give Karl as much time as we can, let's ask him to go ahead and start. Karl?
Thank you, Rob. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all today. I can screen share. There we go. Let's get it up. I love my job, and I love working with people that I love working with. And it is always a pleasure to work with your foundation. And I enjoy everywhere I go, but it's just a pleasure every time I connect with you and with the churches in your area. And thank you for that. Selfishly, I have a good time with you all. So I've been really fascinated by this topic, this fall campaign coming up, because like Rob, we've done some surveys that have some very similar results to what the Methodist survey that you all conducted in Louisiana had. So it's interesting that the responses are very similar. There's so much room for optimism, and I'm thrilled about that, but still a little bit anxious, as many people are, that, you know, we're just over halfway through the year and we still have so many unknowns. So we certainly don't want to take our eye off the ball. And nevertheless, we're also still stuck with some challenges that are beyond our control. We're all in different places. It's been what people are calling an unprecedented year. I'm weary of that. Extraordinary year. We'd all kind of like a break from whatever we're terming as extraordinary. We'd like to break, but it's an important year to keep this cadence and rhythm of everything that we can. So it's really important this year that we continue to exercise our generosity muscles, our giving muscles. It's not just because we want to make it to the other side of this. It's more that this is a moment for our churches. This is kind of game day for us. We're always important, but our ministries are desperately needed this year, probably next year, by each one of us, by me, by our congregations, and by our neighbors, and by people far off. We do so much for so many. So this campaign is our time. It's our moment to bring this show of strength that God would want us to do. Excuse me. So we'd like to bring you some ideas in getting towards this goal. So we're going to trot pretty quickly through an enormous topic. And to do so, we've arranged 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about context of where you are. Second, about a message, super brief part. Number 3, though, we'll talk about function, delivering that message in a very messed up year. And fourth, we'll talk a little bit about taking the next step. If you have questions, I think that you've got a chat function that you can tap into, and you're welcome to ask questions in that, but we're going to keep this rhythm going. So we'll try to respond to questions after the main part of the presentations. So let's go with context. Let's narrow it down to your context so that you can assess where you are and then draft a relevant and achievable plan. We pose questions instead of making statements about this because even though we're all in the same huge, massive storm together, it's still such a wide-reaching storm, and each of our churches experiences this storm so differently from one another. So answering these questions might help you listen to this presentation with your congregation's place and with your tools in mind. What's going to fit you best? So it's just going to be 6. First one is regarding financial well-being. Are your members struggling? Are they mostly okay? Maybe they're somewhere in the middle. The answer to this governs your words and your tone on how you invite members into generosity. You might speak differently to a fully employed congregation with lots of investment portfolios that have recovered mightily versus an underemployed congregation who's living paycheck to paycheck. They might be experiencing a very different storm. Second is distancing. We're all weary of this distancing thing, and we want some return to normalcy, yet many of our churches might still be in the early miles of this marathon. Being distanced impacts our choice of communication, the platforms and the tools that we might use. You know, are you weeks away from being fully back together, or are you 12 or more months? I know in my area, we are very far away from having everyone come back. We're going to start back in dribs and drabs, but having everyone come back, we still anticipate it to be months and months, probably early to mid next year. Are your members worn out from this Zoom thing and from live streaming, or are they loving it? You know, their preferences on how we communicate are going to guide what tools, what media of communication works best for your congregation. Now, the fourth question is, are we as a congregation maintaining our faith at a high level? Are we feeling it? Or is it a lower level? Are we kind of getting a little bit loosey-goosey? And even the basics for us need some strengthening. So is the engagement level strong, or are we losing momentum? The fifth question that's helpful, I think, is what are the key communications that you absolutely must do for your congregation? You got to list your priority pieces on how people listen or how they absorb the information. How will it be communicated? And then find out what are your top priorities and make sure you have the bandwidth to deliver it. It's probably a more difficult year because people have less bandwidth. So if you have 6 things that you want to do, you might be able to only accomplish 3. Figure out what are those 3, because there's way too much to do this year. The 6th question is, are members witnessing the impact of their ministry and their stewardship through your church? More than ever, we might need to deliver a read back to our members things that our givers are making possible because of their gifts through our church. And this is important because we're not in there every week. At least in my church, we, as I said, will be a while. So are we seeing, hearing, and feeling everything if we're only restricted to Zoom webinars? It's harder to do. And if you relate to that, you know what I'm talking about, but it might not be a problem for you. So that's why we do these questions. If you look at maybe your sample results, what would it feel like? Here's something where I thought, this could be my congregation. Some are okay, some are really not. We have probably 9 more months of distance. They're exhausted from online interactions. Our faith activity seems steady through the week, but it's slower. Paper and digital are both important for us, and we're not entirely witnessing the impact of ministry. So we have some work to do. So the stewardship message is the next thing we want to talk about. This is part 2 on our agenda. And we're going to largely jump over this because this is a constant. Rob and I talked about this earlier, and I was so happy that this is really where Rob felt, and I feel very passionate about this. This is the unchanging part of our stewardship campaign. And I hope that that is comforting because it feels like everything's changing, but the important stuff is not. We're going to hit just 2 slides on this because we really want to talk about the tactical functions with our time together. Here's the thing that people are afraid of. There's this pressure. Stewardship is not pressure. Stewardship is more of a discipline. For each of us, it's a lifelong way of being. You can feel the difference between someone who has a long view of their stewardship vision versus those of us who might be reactive in our stewardship relationship. Every year, you know, it's giving is an individual, a very choppy experience. All of us feel like that every now and then. But it then feels like a series of weekly or yearly transactions, which is really not a great feeling. Then we start to succumb to these need and budget-inspired conversations, which is quite unhelpful. Especially when we get anxious about things, when we feel like we're in the midst of this storm, we tend to startle ourselves into an instinct, a quick solution. We show urgency in our messages. We might even use pressure. And when we are thinking about generosity, we kind of start saving more. We've all had these moments of emergencies where a quick solution is needed. So we go into those urgent or pressure-filled moments. But you know, our stewardship message this year does not need to be an emergency message. It needs to focus very simply on what is core, what is not changed. It is about the joyous discipline of thanking God with the way we live our lives and spend and share our money. If we could just keep this slide, I think we would have a great presentation. But then when we get off, people will say, well, why didn't you tell us some ideas? Because you promised us some functional ideas. Let's get to that. Delivery during social distancing. How do we deliver a stable, long game message during the middle of a pandemic? Let's talk about tactics. How do we deliver? If you have a great message, it doesn't really matter if no one sees it or no one hears it. So delivery is important. To implement these tools, we first want to talk about a team. This will vary depending on your church size and style, but this cannot be done by, let's say, a pastor alone. I see a lot of churches who have a pastor who is the stewardship person. It can't be done by a committee alone. A wider team needs to plan this effort. Again, it depends how wide that team is on the size of your church, but you know, there's a stewardship committee who gathers and takes responsibility of the implementation of this plan. You need the leadership. Your lay leaders, they've got to be aware of this program. They have to be enthusiastic and to participate prior to the regular membership participating, but they need to lead. And the pastor needs to be able to preach on this and to support this effort openly and very often. So once that team is in place, here's a high-level view, the rest of this presentation, of some core tools of a 2020 campaign. We're going to break it up into 3 categories of 10 ideas in total, ranking primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary just means these tools are a must. You got to use these tools. Secondary are usual tools. Most of us will probably use them, but none of these would take the place of any of those primary tools. And tertiary are all normal tools. They're very effective. You're going to see them in most of our churches, but they certainly depend on your bandwidth and abilities. They're on that outside circle of what's possible. So you can see already that there's a lot here, and there's lots more that is possible. We're not going to cover everything, but many of these things that are listed could be done 2 times or even many times. So let's get rolling here. To start our sermons, if you only do one thing for stewardship, we ask that you preach on it. What you say as a preacher influences us in the pews and on our sofas. It influences us immensely. I cannot say this loud enough. When the topic of money goes unsaid, it goes unheard. Without that topic, we, the congregation, are left flying solo in how to view money in our lives. We're left up to our own devices. And that's not an area where the right thing comes naturally, if I can be brutally honest. So if you're a pastor, or if you're on the stewardship committee and you're uncomfortable talking about money, you are not alone. That's a normal thing. It's not comfortable for any of us if we perceive ourselves as begging or asking for our own salaries. It just feels awkward. So if you get that, if that sounds right to you, then this will be a great read. I've got a fantastic book. Rob and Chris and Bob might have different recommendations, but this one I found is a great go-to book because it's a really short read. It's called The Spirituality of Fundraising. It's under $10, and you read it in one sitting. It's quite short. It will really help you talk about money. When you read it, you think, oh, all I have to do is say those things. Those are easy because you're not begging. You're not asking for your salary. You're inviting people into ministry. Next in importance, under primary tools, is this letter, or maybe it's an email this year. This serves as an introduction and an invitation to the fall campaign. A letter has several common elements that I'd love to share with you. I've been looking into 20 letters for this fall campaign. Some examples. There's some wonderful ones online because the people who are already have their fall campaigns together seem to really have their act together. So there's a few things out there. They have things like, of course, your dear so-and-so, your personal welcome. It's okay to note that this has been an extraordinary year. It's hard not to start with that because it's been the driver this year in how we do everything. You can also note that we are so grateful to all those who have shown their faithfulness in this year. Because of you, we've seen our church respond boldly in the face of fear and of uncertainty. Really invite them to feel that their gifts in the past have made this crisis ministry this year possible. Note that we're still called to be Christ's hands and feet in the world, but we need to do this in different ways. And ability, this one is optional. Again, it depends on how your church's membership is affected. If people are really struggling and giving is severely impacted, note that all have suffered. Many are devastated. Many are still relatively able to step forward into this with us. And then have an invitation, inviting people to join you. This is a time that you and I are deeply needed. And make that invitation very, very clear to them. Then explain to them how they can do their pledge. We'll talk just a little bit more about that in a second. And finally, thank you. Don't forget that part. You can never say thank you enough. So for letters, if you have the ability, consider segmenting letters. Many churches do this. Directing the variation on one paragraph, the invitation part of the letter, to different audiences. The letter can mostly read the same thing, but one paragraph might go specifically towards newcomers, letting them know that nearly all members make an annual financial pledge. Some tithe, others give as they are able. We invite you to consider that. A segmented audience is also non-pledging household stating, we're doing great ministry here because of your gifts. You know, we're leaning into this boldly. Please prayerfully consider joining us in making a financial pledge. And then to pledgers, grateful. You've always been supportive. I hope that we can count on your support again in the coming year. So segmenting letters is very common, certainly not required. Then the pledge. This year, this is a huge deal, the pledge. In many years, we can just follow trends from the past years. You know, it goes up, down a few percent within a tight range of accuracy, but not this year. Following our multi-year trend lines will lead us far off the real numbers for the coming year. Some people are going to do better. That is happening. Some might be struggling. It's hard to forecast. So pledges are how we can most reliably forecast next year's income. And it is okay to state this tactfully in your communications, that without a pledge, we, the leadership, are flying blind at really the worst possible time to do so. Because in the coming year, we are inevitably going to plan some very difficult decisions. For churches who are planning those, it is okay to say, there are difficult decisions coming up. You need to be aware. It's not threatening, it's not pressure, because if that's going to happen, they do need to know. This is their church home, their church family. Here's another reason pledges are a very big deal. From all of the numbers we've been looking at, pledged income has proven steadfast in this crisis. Pledged income has remained fairly steady, while non-pledged and plate income is far below budget on average. So it's imperative to communicate pledging well and to describe its importance this year and make it easier to do. So first, highly recommend invite pledging online. It might be the only or else the primary method for many churches to invite the pledge this year. Refer members to it through your invitation letter and articles. Note that many might be concerned about the mail. It's probably more perception than reality. However, it's still a perception. And if someone's uncomfortable online pledging, you bet you can do it. So arrange your giving webpage on your website so that pledging is clearly prioritized, sharing top billing with giving online. Because we can't push giving online out of view. It's just not a good idea, because that's how many of our gifts are coming in now. And be sure that there's a compelling introduction to the pledge and a distinct button, not just a hyperlink, an underlined different color, whatever. Make sure you've got a button that someone is brought to. And advise the reader that there are other tools to pledge besides online. For members who are not comfortable with online pledging, call the office or send a paper pledge card if that's available. Do something to give them alternatives to pledge online if that's uncomfortable. So when you click this pledge online button, it's got to do something. You need an online form. Your church software may already have a form that you can use. Many churches don't, so they have an online form. You can use Google Forms or the one called Jot Form. These are free. It's great because it brings and aggregates all of those things to you in a pretty, as secure as these days you can get environment to collect that kind of information. And finally, make sure it is easy to use on a mobile device, that it is, easy to pledge on a mobile device. Mobile access is imperative. Here's why. At any given moment, we are all far more likely to have a phone in our hand than to be at a computer. I am never far away from this thing, ever. And each of us is going to be invited to pledge at a moment when our mobile device is in hand or within reach, and we can tap and continue to make our pledge. It is significantly less likely that we will be at our computers. So we're just talking here about eliminating the friction between an invitation to pledge and then making the pledge. Let's remove that time and all the distance and the number of activities to make that pledge. You might even have that pledge link on your homepage for the entire campaign season. So many churches do not want to miss this physical representation of the pledge card. More and more chatter that I've detected or that I've asked directly says churches want that pledge card. They like that normality. They don't want to lose what we've always done. So here are 9 common pieces in a pledge card. I'll list them real quick. A pledger's basic information, it's always there. A space for your pledge amount. An easy place for planned giving. Churches who do this, churches who ask for a planned giving checkbox, find and note to us that is amazingly effective to have planned giving mentioned on your pledge card. Do not miss that opportunity. It is huge and so easy. All of these pledge cards seem to include some kind of an invitation, a welcome text aiming at like the core purpose and opportunity of making pledge. This 5th thing is less common. It's still innovative, and a lot of churches love this. Some churches provide pledgers their previous 2 years pledge history. And the 6th thing, they even show what an increase for them in particular would look like for the coming year, right above that pledge box. All right, the final pieces here are many churches are including a giving chart on the reverse side to show what proportional giving might look like for someone considering the size of their pledge or increasing their percentage. The 8th is, especially for new members or pledges, a quick statement on why pledge. Because if you are new to pledging, it might not make a lot of sense. It might be like a little bit like, why would I sign up for an obligation? But we need to rephrase that to them, have them think about it differently. And finally, give them a final step. You can see I've got a website blanked out, but give them a place to go to send their pledge information in. However it's going to happen this year, whether it's online here or through email or through the regular mail. They've got to have that final step. We need to be led. Final comment on pledging. Maybe this year, I'm just throwing this out, you could consider an additional term to pledging. Estimate of giving. Well, I'll tell you why. The term pledge conveys a level of commitment and a word of honor that is not taken lightly by a lot of our congregation members. If there's a great sense of uncertainty this year for them, many might feel anxious about a hard shell commitment for the coming year. An estimate of giving, that term might be less daunting. It might feel less like another obligation that they might have to break in the coming year. That is just, not something strongly recommended, but it speaks to certain congregations. And so I wanted to bring that one up. Under secondary tools, we start with a realistic budget and stewardship forecast. Revising a budget and stewardship expectations to reflect what is really happening is perhaps an important exercise in conveying to a congregation what is probable under current trends or expectations. If there's potential or even a likelihood of cutbacks to programs and to staff, imagine how important that is to declare in advance and draw a very, very clear line connecting our giving, our generosity, and what programs are at risk or will be, or what programs will be possible because of our generosity for the coming year. I know several churches who are looking at going on a 6-month budgeting cycle because things are less easy to forecast over the long term. Let's talk about impact now. Demonstrate the impact of your ministries, especially this year. Without being together in person, we talked about this earlier. Members are not witnessing everything that's happening. The church might feel like it's closed. It's not a good feeling. Members need to hear what they could not see. That ministry happened this year. It happened in new ways. That this year is not a year of rest. We're not taking a break. We're doing amazing things, but we have to reinvent how to do them totally differently. And all of this innovation or adapting and continued ministry is possible because of our collective generosity. So we need to celebrate that impact. And we got to, we got to brag a little bit, which I know is hard for a lot of us, but it's an important time to celebrate it. So I'll send, in these follow-up slides, a couple of other ideas. Here is a sample. In the Presbyterian Church, we call it a Minute for Mission video. We can't do it in person, so we're doing all of our testimonials by video. It's pretty exciting. Yep, that's me without a beard, and I will not have a beard soon again. But here I'm sharing the contradiction of the emptiness of our church versus all of the amazing things that are actually happening within and because of our church community. We also do mission impact videos practically on a weekly basis so that we can show people all of these things that you are doing through this church are amazing and innovative and new. Impact is absolutely critical. Using a narrative budget is a great tool, especially during pledge season. A traditional budget is, the numbers. It shows how much money came in, how much was spent. It's line items and numbers. Important to have, but a narrative budget takes those dollar figures and applies all those dollars to the actual action that happened, the people who were involved and affected, and it tells the story of what happened last year because of the generosity of our members. This can be in video format. It's really exciting to have a narrative budget video or a brochure format. There's one example here. We put this widget together for Presbyterian churches, but I'll show you what the impact is. Just to make a brochure that says, here's our church, here's our mission statement, and here are the impact stories we have because of the money that went there. It doesn't talk about salaries or electrical bill. It's a great way to discuss your impact. Here's a simple array of tools to tell those kinds of stories. I use this all the time. It's called Adobe Spark. They have this free website where you can make your own flyer, your own social media post, your own web page, your own video. It's just it feels unlimited what you can do with this to tell your story, whether it's a tiny little blurb or a big, big, long story. It allows you to include your pictures. It provides you even stock pictures. You get to type in your own message, and it has musical tracks that you can apply. It's really fast to learn, relative. I mean, all of us are different. So if you have a message or a story, this is a quick way to get it up and running online. So while most of us are going to find this amazing, if you have advanced skills of your own or on your church's staff, you're going to find this limiting. Sometimes it's going to be frustrating, but I don't recommend it to those individuals. They're going to prefer keeping those high-end resources because they're fantastic. But these are just, some cool tools for those of us who don't have that budget and don't want to learn a relatively hard new piece of software to make all these videos. I've literally done dozens and dozens and dozens of these. All right, so let's get to this Commitment Sunday. It's often the final day of this official campaign. It's the day when we dedicate the commitments that have been made, and we celebrate that impact that's going to happen because of those gifts. How this looks this year is going to be very different, especially if we're at a church where no one or not everyone is worshiping together in person. Heard some cool different ways to do it. One church I know is having tents out in their parking lot with a praise band, and if you don't want to get out of your car, you don't. You can even do a drive-through. Thank yous. Get ready to thank. Thank. Prepare your plan on how and whom to thank. Get a system together and make it easy on yourself. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to complete. You do not want it to be difficult to complete because it probably won't get done. Get ready the note cards, the letter, the email, the paperless post, or whatever it is, so that after Consecration Sunday or after you receive the pledge commitments, you've got a quick turnaround because that really matters. Let's get to tertiary resources with an FAQ. These are obviously your most common questions that we are not on hand to answer 24 hours a day, especially for your new pledgers. I can give you some examples of these. You can put them on, actually a great place to put them, especially this year, is on your website, on your pledging page. Here's an example of a web page that you could create and just link to through your website. Like your web developer doesn't need to make a whole new page. If you use that program I just shared with you, Adobe Spark, you could hop onto Adobe Spark, make your own FAQ, and just have a button on your website that leads over that. So you don't have this heavy list of things to do from your webmaster. So here's what like a cover page might look like, that as people scroll down, it would slide up and bring up this quick Q&A, all of the questions and answers, and then on the bottom, there's a button that your member could click if they're ready to pledge. Have that click here button for your pledge everywhere. Minutes for mission, or your mission stories are great opportunities for your campaign. Use them for a budget update to your congregation, an invitation to the pledge, testimonials from leadership, testimonies from pledgers on why they give, why they pledge, and what impact their gifts have made. So this year, testimonials will likely be in writing or video for a lot of churches. And again, that Adobe Voice is probably the easiest, quickest and lowest cost method of doing something virtual. I'm going to skip that next point. It's off the mark. So lastly, let's talk about blurbs. Blurbs are quick nuggets to get in front of congregation members on a regular basis, a recurring basis. As we're all over informed these days, we feel like we're getting way too much information. The brevity of blurbs might be just right for each of us to remember. A frequent and short blurb is probably going to be more effective than a single big long article if you've got to balance. You know your congregation better than I do, certainly. I would say do them both, but if you don't have the time, those blurbs are fast, easy, and frequent to put together. You can put them on social media. That's another huge bonus. Put them in the worship bulletin. You can have it as a slide at a worship service or in your church newsletter. And they can be on these topics like why pledge. It's a really important one again for your new members. How to pledge. How it's different this year. Why pledging is so important, especially this year. I've got some good blurbs for that. I'd be delighted to share as well. What are the great things we've done? Have a weekly column. What are the great things we're going to do? And also scripture on generosity. I've got a wonderful list of those that I'd be delighted to share. So I'm thrilled that we are getting to next steps. I wanted to make sure we do this and honor your time and keep everything in so that we can get some questions and answers if there are any. I don't see the chat room, but I hope you're filling it up. If you're not, I'm thrilled also because that means we've answered it all. Right, Rob? So we're also pleased, I think we're going to be able to share these slides after this in case it would be helpful to reference back to some of these ideas and links because we've had to go through it pretty quickly to be efficient. But I do want to close out thoughts on these next steps. You know, what do we do next? Probably the first thing that I'm grabbing onto with my stewardship committee, because I'm the chair at my church, also at our presbytery. We're putting together that list of priorities, the things that we absolutely have to have in place. That stewardship package with the letter, with the pledge card, and with the impact story, like our narrative budget, the sermon, things like that. And we're scheduling it out. And I've just put a sample calendar up here. It's hypothetical. Notice that many steps here are the same as usual. This can actually be a comfortable exercise because as different as this year is, so much will be the same. I'm really glad to say that. I didn't know that when we started out this exercise, but it feels much more comfortable to me than it did, and I hope you'll find that comforting as well. But it does differ drastically from other years in two ways. One, foremost, media of communication is entirely different this year for many of our churches. Like how we deliver this message will be different. Two is the importance of demonstrating impact. It's always been important, but it's never been greater than this year. Talking about what gifts have made possible and what gifts will be possible. With fewer charitable dollars this year, givers are going to look much more intentionally at where their giving has gone and where it's going and where it will make a difference. So this calendar is a little bit of just putting some of those pieces that I've shared on the previous page, primary, secondary, and tertiary, just onto kind of a week's schedule. It's really simple when you see it on a calendar. I get that there's some more difficult things, and you won't be finished with it on Commitment Sunday. I know some of us, my church, drags this follow-up on for, shall I admit, months. So this is aspirational, I understand. So finally, I hope this has been interesting and helpful. I'm just so happy for everyone on this to know that you actually have help. You have people who know this stuff and that you can access really easily. Not everyone has that. It's kind of a rare thing. I love the moniker where faith and money come together, because that's really your hub here at the foundation. But your greatest resources are here. And I highly encourage you to contact these very resourceful and creative individuals that I've got up on the screen. And before I sign off, I want to thank the foundation and Rob for having me join you all today. And I'm going to pass it now back to Rob.
Super good. Well, now you can see why we asked Karl to join us. He's just a wealth of information and presents it in a way so easy for even me to understand. So I am grateful for his ministry and all the information he shares. We've been collecting some of the questions along the way. We had more than one person ask if a copy of these slides would be available. And I've already talked to Karl about that, and he has agreed, so they will be. Someone asked whether or not a copy of this entire webinar would be available. Yes, it is recorded, and it will be on our website as soon as we can get it there, so give us a day or two. We've had some questions about various forms. Can we get a copy of the blurb? Can we get a copy of an online pledging card? And so everything you know, Karl, we need a copy of in some form or fashion. These are interesting times, but you know that old saw that says the more things change, the more things stay the same. And faith in God stays the same. I think our need to respond to God's love stays the same. The comment that Karl made that giving is a discipline, it's not an event, a discipline. You know, it's part of our faith journey, and it's a way for us to expand our faith, develop our faith, strengthen our faith, and it would be a shame for us not to share this opportunity with the members of our churches. We will address these various issues that came up. I'm scanning the other questions, examples of video narrative budgets. We'll do that as well. So most anything that's been mentioned here, we would have. One person said something about they used a narrative budget, but a lot of the programming plans have been scrapped due to COVID. Would you recommend skipping it for this year, 2020? Let me ask the expert there, Karl. The question is, we used a narrative budget last year with great success. However, so much has been canceled this year. Would you suggest we skip it this year?
I don't have enough information to say to skip it or continue, but I find a lot of churches, and I hope each one of us can find this. Even if we've canceled programs, the things that are happening are still critical. We may have canceled some really hard programs to cancel, but there are things that you're probably doing instead of that are critical pieces of ministry, and you need to tell the story that this year is really hard. This is different. And we are doing everything we can, but we're reinventing the way that we do church. So we are not, again, we're not on break. And so perhaps a video story, it might be a narrative budget. It might be some kind of a hybrid where you can have a narrative budget, say, these are the things that your gifts are making possible. This is the ministry your gifts are making possible. But making it clear that while we've had to cut programs, that doesn't lock in as we've stopped doing these things. We just have to do things differently. What I'd be happy to do, if there's anyone that would like examples, or maybe I can even put an example together as one of the follow-ups to say, here's maybe a sample sequencing of a video of how do you tell that story. This is a crazy year. Look at all that we've done because of you. Yes, we've had to cut some programs. Thank you for your generosity. We can keep doing these amazing things and build back. That's why we're going into this pledge year with such, hopefully, gusto. I know that is a really simple answer because I get to just, say, here's what you do and not have to do it. But I'd be delighted to help out if someone wants to see a hypothetical, like a video or something like that. The other thing, Rob, I'll just say real quick is I do have some blurbs and things that I'd be happy to share back with you. Sample cards that I put up on Word documents so churches can put in their own stuff. And the foundation might have their own to share, but I'd love to share resources like that as well.
That's great. There are a few other questions, but in the interest of time, because I promised people we're not going to do anything for an hour, and we're about almost there. We'll get these other questions answered. Karl, I'll probably just send them to you, if not discuss them with you after this is all over, so that we can post those answers as well. I wanted to mention some of these other webinars that we have coming up. And while we still have a little bit of time, in our new world, we're trying this new form of communication, this webinar thing. Last week, we've already mentioned we went through the survey and gave you the results. I found them to be very encouraging. I would suggest you go, if you haven't seen it, go back and look at it. It is on our website. Today was annual campaigns in the time of COVID-19. And as soon as we can, it will be on our website. The next one on August 20th, just a little over a week away, I think is really neat. We've been working on it for several months. We have an elder care attorney leading this for us, and it's on aging parents and their financial affairs. I'm a baby boomer, and probably about in the middle of that pack. I have buried my parents, so I've already gone through this, but there's still a lot of us out there that are beginning to help our parents more and more, and then there are the generations after. And for that matter, my kids in the future. It's just, I think, an excellent amount of information that we should make ourselves aware of. Again, we are shooting for hour-long seminars. They're worth every penny you're paying for them since they're not costing you anything, and I would suggest you look at that one. The one after that on August 25th is Encouraging Generosity in Tough Times. That's really kind of combining, I think, snippets from 2 or 3 of the previous ones that you've heard about. And Karl will be back with us to help lead us with that. And then end of year giving in a messed up year. That's later in October, October the 14th. But we know we'll be facing the end of the year giving opportunities as we get closer to the end of the year. You need to go and register. I've been tipped here to remind you need to register for these things, as about 50 some odd of y'all did for this one. So be sure and do that. And we look forward to bringing this and other tidbits to you as we go along. We just like to say that we're really proud to be your foundation. We are here to help you in any way that we can. We're very grateful to Karl, who has been helping us for the last year or so and has become a real friend of the foundation. So with nothing further, thank you, God bless, and stay safe.